Captain Robert Nairac, an undercover soldier captured and killed in South Armagh 30 years ago. Tonight, for the first time, we hear the inside story from one of his killers. A man who to this day is on the run.
I told Nairac that he better make a confession because unless he told the truth, he was going to be shot. He proceeded saying, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned."
South Armagh and the Troubles were the toughest and deadliest IRA teams operated. 123 British soldiers were killed in this area, more than 40 police officers. A place apart where the IRA's writ ran freely and ruthlessly. This was the texture of the terrain that Captain Robert Nairac tried to infiltrate. A British soldier singing rebel songs in an IRA heartland.
He took far too many risks all at once, as opposed to measuring them out. And in the end, he was found out in 3 steps in.
We were questioning Nairac. He was getting slapped around a bit. He answered the questions. He kept the story that he originally started off with, that he was Danny McConnell from Portadown. Townsend didn't want to waste too much time. He actually asked that this man be assassinated. He asked me to shoot him.
Three decades have passed since Robert Nairac was murdered and earned the George Cross. The Troubles are said to be over, but the IRA in South Armagh has yet to give up his body. Tonight, we set out to ask those in a position to know exactly what happened to Robert Nairac.
Were you not in the slightest bit curious what happened to the body?
I was, but I wasn't asking any questions.
Why not?
Because you can get in trouble doing that.
Why won't the IRA give up Robert Nairac's body?
I have suggested you ask Mr. Adams and Mr. McGuinness that.
Mr. McGuinness, where is Captain Robert Nairac's body?
I haven't got a clue.
Mr. McGuinness?
Don't know anything about it.
Mr. McGuinness? Captain Robert Nairac's killing was one of the most notorious murders of the Troubles. The undercover soldier had willfully ignored all military procedures, all his training, and contrived to virtually write his own death warrant. In the early hours of the morning of the 15th of May 1977, Captain Robert Nairac was shot dead at Ravensdale, just across the border in the Irish Republic. The gunman Liam Townsend was later convicted in a Dublin court. 5 other men from the Jonesboro area were jailed in Northern Ireland for their role in the killing. 3 others were wanted for questioning, but they went on the run and remain at large today. The security forces north and south of the border did carry out extensive searches for Robert Nairac's body, to no avail. It had disappeared. This is the field at Ravensdale where Robert Nairac was beaten and then shot dead. For many years it was rumoured that his body was destroyed at a nearby meat plant. I've spoken to many of those involved in the actual killing, and tonight we'll hear for the first time what some of them believe happened to Robert Nairac's body. It's 8 years since the IRA started giving up the bodies of the so-called disappeared, but there's been no word of Robert Nairac, nor of the other 2 men who were last seen alive in South Armagh. Despite a raft of guarantees, including legal immunity, virtually no information has been forthcoming in these 3 cases. South Armagh, it seems, doesn't want to give up its dead. The obvious person to speak to about Robert Nairac's body is the man who shot him dead, Liam Townsend. A senior member of the IRA at the time, he should know where the soldier's body is. I decide to go and see him. Hello, Liam Townsend. Hi, doing Darragh McIntyre, BBC. Liam, would like to ask you about Robert Nairac. Where is Robert Nairac's body? Liam, you were the last person to see him alive, Liam. Liam Townsend, can you tell us where you believe Robert Nairac's body is? What happened to him after he was shot by you, Liam Townsend? Liam, is it not time to tell what happened to Robert Nairac's body? 30 years on, the war is over. Do you not have a moral responsibility, Liam Townsend, to tell what happened to Robert Nairac? 30 years on, 30 years ago you felt strong enough to shoot a man dead. 30 years on, can you now tell us where his body is? What happened to him, Liam Townsend? Thousands of words have been written about Robert Nairac, but much of his story remains a mystery. I hope to find out exactly what happened that night and see if I can get closer to the truth of what happened to his body. First, I want to learn a little more about the 29-year-old army captain. The Queen's Own Grenadier Guards, trooping the colour, one of the oldest and most prestigious regiments in the army, Captain Robert Lawrence Nairac's regiment. A slow march, the Nairac GC, was composed in his honour. He is also commemorated at the Guards Museum. What sort of a man was he? What can we learn about him in here?
Amongst the other artefacts that we have within the collection, just here we have, for me, items which kind of underline the dichotomy that we see in this young man.
Like the complexity of him.
The complexity. He was something of a maverick. He was perhaps perceived as being unconventional in his soldiering. And yet, here we see his service dress jacket, made by one of the finest tailors in Savile Row. And indeed, his bowler hat, made by the finest hatters in London. Indeed, with his initials sitting inside. The accoutrements of an archetypical Guards officer.
For me, though, another exhibit stands out. A UVF embroidered handkerchief found in his belongings. Innocent of itself, but pointing to the later controversy which would surround the nature of Robert Nairac's duty here. Robert Nairac's origins were far removed from the UVF and Ireland. He came from an upper-middle-class Catholic family in Gloucestershire, the West Country.
Well, he was chiefly interested in animals. His first tame thing was a snake, and then he had a polecat ferret, which lived inside his shirt. Later on, of course, he had these hawks. Then he was very good at training them. He could tame anything, I think.
Robert Nairac was educated at the elite Catholic public school Ampleforth, where he excelled in the classroom and on the playing fields. His path set smooth for Oxford University, where he arrived in 1968.
He was a very handsome man. That's the first thing I think to appreciate. He was also very charismatic, very enthusiastic, always full of good ideas.
Julian Malins remembers Robert Nairac as a flatmate, a close friend, and the captain of the university boxing team. What sort of boxer was he?
Well, I think he was more courage and more going forward and more capable of absorbing punishment than great skill. I don't think I'm doing him an injustice when I say that. He was terrific. Going forward and absorbing punishment and giving it too, but he wasn't a very cerebral boxer.
None of Robert Nairac's friends was surprised when he applied to join the Grenadier Guards in September 1972. That same month there was another event that could be said to have had a decisive role in determining Robert Nairac's fate. Sectarian tensions exploded in the town of Lurgan. Loyalists rioted and targeted Catholics. One man and his family received particular attention. They fled to Jonesborough in South Armagh overnight. The man's name, Terry McCormick, like Nairac, a boxer, a former Irish welterweight champion tipped for the Commonwealth Games. I believe this man was to be central to Robert Nairac's killing. But he went on the run after the murder and hasn't been seen since. I head for Larne, where the local war memorial has proof of his ties to the town. There it is, the name Terence McCormick. Now, I've been told that's an uncle of Terry McCormick. He'd been in the RAF and died in the last year of the war in 1945. Just over 30 years later, his namesake and nephew, Terry McCormick, will go on the run after his role in the killing of a British soldier, Robert Nairac. Captain Robert Nairac was no ordinary soldier. After one routine regimental tour here in 1973, he came back again in a very different role.
I came out here in 1974, met Robert. It was the first time I met him at a place called Castle Dillon, where he was working with an undercover unit.
At Castle Dillon, Robert Nairac came under the influence of this man, SAS Captain Tony Boyle. Significantly, many believe he modelled himself on Boyle.
He operated in the border in the early days, 74, before the regiment was deployed on surveillance duties, and that's when Robert would have worked with him and no doubt seen how he operated, and he had developed his own distinctive style of operating. I have the feeling that Robert might well have got some of his ideas from how Tony operated, but I don't think he necessarily had the same skills as Tony.
This cottage, close to Jonesborough, but actually in County Louth, provides a clue as to how the unit is said to have operated. Tony Boyle is said to have crossed the border to kidnap an IRA suspect who lived in what he believed to be the sanctuary of the Irish Republic. In March 1976, 21-year-old Sean McKenna was asleep when armed men entered his house in the middle of the night.
Heard a noise, and the next thing I knew, there was a light, a gun with a light on top of it, a wee pencil light on top of the gun, pointing at my head and somebody shouting, "Don't take your fucking hand out or I'll blow your head off." Well, he said, if you want to end it here now, he said, and don't come with us, he said, your death will be claimed for the 10 Protestants who were shot in White Cross. He said, you'll be claimed as by the UVF.
Sean McKenna's story was denied at the time, but now has the ring of truth.
I'm fairly certain, and I'm not talking ill of the dead or anything, I'm fairly certain that that's probably true, and I think that Tony probably, on his own, had gone and fetched him, leaving his backup over the border.
Reverberations from this incident fed into the frenzied climate of conspiracy and fear that already had hold in South Armagh. Sean McKenna was sentenced to 25 years jail the same weekend that 8 men from his village, including Terry McCormick, encountered Robert Nairac in their local pub. Exactly what Robert Nairac was doing that fateful night is still debated, as are allegations which claim he was linked to the infamous Miami Showband massacre and the killing of an IRA commander in County Monaghan. No proof has ever emerged, but the claims which started shortly after his killing persist. What is known for sure is that by 1976 he was officially working as a military liaison officer between a newly arrived SAS squadron and the police. Unusually for a soldier who often worked undercover, he seemed to go out of his way to be noticed, conspicuous even when on patrol with the regular army in places like Crossmaglen.
Captain Nairac was well recognised. Now that we know who he was recognised because he stood out. So different from the rest of the soldiers because he dressed different.
In what way?
Oh, well, I mean, he had the same uniform on him, but he had beautiful black, curly hair, you see. And he always carried a double-barreled shotgun around with him.
This high profile brought with it risks.
We began to get reports from various sources in South Armagh saying that there was an SAS man parading about the place and they were going to get him. The curly-headed SAS man who'd been in Crossmaglen, called Danny. I got a hold of Robert when he was next up In fact, I think I might have sent for him and said, look, you know, you're blown. You really do need to think about what you're doing.
And what did he say to you?
He laughed.
He didn't take it seriously?
I don't know whether he did or not. He just laughed in my face and that was it.
It maybe was this very bravado that led to him going alone to a pub in the Republican heartland of Drummondtee, close to Jonesborough, on the night of May 14th, 1977.
Why do you think he was in the pub that night?
I think he honestly couldn't face sitting in the base. He always wanted to be doing things. And we'll never know, but I think he did feel that that night there was a chance that he might be able to spot some associations, some people meeting with someone else that might lead him further into the sort of picture of what was going on. But we don't know. The only person who knows is Robert.
The Three Steps pub was already crowded when he walked in. One of those gathered around the bar was the man who had fled Larne with his family just as Robert Nairac was joining the army, Terry McCormick.
Captain Nairac asked one of the girls that was in the bar at the time what was the best way to get across the border without running into any army checkpoints. This information was brought back to the people that were beside me at the bar.
Terry McCormick has been on the run in America for the past 30 years. His account of events that night is exclusive to Spotlight and is the first time anyone involved in the killing has spoken publicly about it.
Hello, Terry. How are you? All right. You ready to do this?
Yes, I am.
He asked us not to film his face, but insisted he wanted to tell the truth.
I think I'm a completely different person than the person that was involved in what happened that night. It was something will never, ever leave my mind. There's not a day goes by, but I don't say a prayer for Captain Nairac.
It is now apparent that Robert Nairac's question about how to cross the border set in motion everything which followed. He'd aroused the suspicions of McCormick and those with him.
The girl was asked to ask Captain Nairac to get up for a dance and for her to see if she could see if he was carrying a gun on him. At this time, we did not know who Captain Nairac was. Nobody knew who this guy was. The girl asked Captain Nairac would he like to get up for a dance. He refused. He didn't get up to dance. Again, I think this is when he requested himself to be called to sing a song.
Got a singer here from Belfast, Johnny Boy. Give a nice round of applause for Johnny Boy.
He gave his name as, I think it was Danny McCurlean from Belfast. He sang a couple of songs. In the meantime, it was like, who is this guy? It was decided that when he went to the bathroom, we would approach him in the bathroom and see who exactly he was. He never, at any time that night, went to the bathroom. Then it came to around 11 o'clock. He was seen going out the door. I followed him out the door after telling the person that I was with to watch my back, basically, and I followed Captain Nairac up the car park. About halfway up the car park, I run in behind him and put my finger to the back of his head, basically hoping that he would think it was a gun. I asked him for his license. He turned around swiftly. I punched him in the face. I heard what I assumed to be a gun.
What do you mean you heard a gun?
Well, I wasn't sure that it was a gun hit the ground. It was dark. I assumed what I heard was like metal hitting the ground. I screamed that he had a gun to the people that were basically watching from outside the 3 steps. The gun, as I say, I thought it was a gun. Nairac was on the ground. I was basically keeping him there as best I could. My friends, they came up and they all started punching and kicking. The gun was recovered from the ground, from the side of the car. It was put to Nairac's head. He was told that basically he was going to be questioned, like he was put in the car.
2 men get in the back seat of the car with Robert Nairac, McCormick holding the officer's own weapon. They drive at speed along the network of small roads toward the border a few miles away, crossing into the Republic just past Jonesborough, where they continue south for a short distance. They turn off the main Belfast to Dublin road here at Ravensdale, taking this little slip road down into the country. But they don't go very far. They take this first corner and then just drive another 40 yards or so to a little bridge across the Flurry River. They go over the bridge and then pull up and get out. They took him into this field here beside the bridge and began their interrogation.
He told us he came from Portadown in Belfast. He was an official IRA. Shortly before this, Sean McKenna had been kidnapped from his house by the British Army, and whoever this person was something, you know, more than just a guy from Portadown. I think that the majority that was there that night, like, were thinking that he was SAS.
But you didn't know it, you just...
We didn't know.
An IRA gunman, Liam Townsend, who'd been drinking in a Dundalk pub, is sent for and driven to the field. By now, Robert Nairac must have known he was fighting for his life. He makes a desperate effort to escape.
The person that was holding the gun at this time, Nairac made some kind of move, like, and this person fired a shot, which ricocheted, hit the wall, the bridge that we were at, and ricocheted slightly, grazed my side.
The interrogation and the beatings resume.
He was getting slapped around a bit, and he answered the questions. He kept the story that he originally started off with. He was Danny McConnell from Portadown. He was a member of the official IRA. He called himself a sticky.
While all of Robert Nairac's assailants are Republicans, none but the gunman, Liam Townsend, is in the IRA.
What condition was Townsend in when he arrived?
Townsend was, I would say, drunk. Townsend basically didn't want to waste too much time. He actually asked that this man be assassinated. He asked to shoot him.
Did he ask you to shoot him?
He asked me to shoot him.
What did you say?
No.
Why did you say no?
Because I didn't know I didn't know who he was. I had no idea who this man was really, although I surmised that, you know, that he was, you know, something, you know, he was something like, you know, but not enough to be shot, like.
Robert Nairac is taken further up the field. By now he's been questioned and beaten for at least an hour.
I told Captain Nairac that he was going to be executed unless he told us the truth. And I told him that we were going to get a priest for him.
What did he say?
He never says really anything. Can we cut here?
Yeah.
30 years on, Terry McCormack finds it difficult to tell what he did next.
Did you pretend to be a priest?
I did.
How did that happen?
Well, I told Nairac that he better make a confession, because unless he told the truth, he was going to be shot. He proceeded saying, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." Basically, I'm not sure how it was stopped, but it ended there, basically, as like how, you know.
How do you feel about that?
I feel terrible.
Why?
Well, this man either knew that I wasn't a priest, or he was trying to make his last confession. I'm not sure which one of which one of them two is the truth.
What did he say to you?
He says, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." I immediately stopped. I'm not sure if I punched him or I'm not sure how it ended, but that's as far as that one.
Robert Nairac never admits he is a British soldier.
Townsend says that, you know what, I'm going to shoot him. I, myself, along with one other of the men that was there, I says that I wanted nothing to do with it. I walked away. When I say I walked away, I walked, maybe I was still in the field, like when I heard the shots. I was then driven to a house where there was a change of clothes, and I went home. I was drove home.
An IRA team comes and takes Robert Nairac's body away. Terry McCormack went on the run along with two others days later. He was in America when he heard that Robert Nairac's body was put through a meat grinder. He says he was so concerned he asked for a meeting with the senior Republican.
He told me that the body that night was taken and was buried. Farmer, or the person that owned that piece of land, had seen a dog or a fox or whatever with a part of the body in his land. He approached a member of the IRA that he knew and told him that what he had seen, and requested that if the body had been buried in his land, he wanted it removed. He didn't want anything to do with it. He wanted it off his property. I was told that the body was removed and that he was given a burial.
So after years of rumours, perhaps the true story of what happened to Robert Nairac. But it is frustratingly short of detail. I had hoped the other two men on the run in America might help, but I failed to locate them. Then, to my astonishment, I learned that one of them, a man called Kevin Crilly, has been back in Northern Ireland for 3 years. I called to see him.
I don't have anything to say.
Kevin Crilly pretends not to know what I'm talking about before he gives up the charade. He admits to a minor role that night. I want to know what he can tell me about Robert Nairac's body.
I have no idea, and that's been very truthful and honest.
Have you ever tried to find out where the body is?
No, I haven't, no.
Were you not in the slightest bit curious what happened to the body?
I was, but I wasn't asking any questions.
Why not?
Because I can get in trouble doing that. I'm just trying to keep my nose as clean as I possibly can. I'm not getting involved, I'm not doing anything.
The police could arrest you at any moment. What would you do if they did? You ready for that?
As ready as I'll ever be, I guess. There's no one ever ready for it, but if it happens, it happens. Peace of mind, you know what I mean? Get on with my life.
Do you regret your role in what happened that
Indeed,
night?
I do, believe me, I do.
He too has heard the rumours of the body being disposed of at a meat plant.
Did you believe that?
I didn't know what to believe. So back then, you know, you didn't know what to believe.
What other stories did you hear?
I heard his body was buried. I heard it was moved to some different location. You know, I
heard it was
honestly don't know.
Who would be the people to speak to about that?
Wouldn't have a clue. I honestly wouldn't have a clue.
But others do have a clue. I have spoken to half a dozen former and serving senior police officers on both sides of the border, as well as members of the Republican community, and they have suggested I seek out leaders of the IRA in the area at the time. One name keeps coming up: Brian Smith. An IRA operative in the 1970s and based in Dundalk for most of the Troubles, Brian Smith is now back living in South Armagh. I catch up with him in Newry.
Brian Smith, Darragh McIntyre from the BBC. I'd like to ask you about Robert Nairac.
I never heard tell of him. I know nothing about Robert Nairac.
Never heard tell of him?
I heard tell of him in papers.
Brian, you were the leader of the IRA in North Louth at the time.
Somebody's having you on. Somebody's winding you up.
Brian Smith, why won't the IRA give up Robert Nairac's body?
I have suggested you ask Mr. Adams and Mr. McGuinness that.
Brian Smith?
There is a logic to this suggestion. Martin McGuinness has admitted to being a senior IRA commander. I meet him at Stormont.
Mr. McGuinness, where is Captain Robert Nairac's body?
I haven't got a clue.
Mr. McGuinness?
Don't know anything about it.
Mr. McGuinness, why won't the IRA give up, in South Armagh, give up Captain Robert Nairac's body?
I think, Dara, you know better than anybody else. If you want to request an interview with me about any matter, all you have to do in a very civilised way, come along to my office, request the interview, you get a reply.
Mr. McGuinness, Robert Nairac was murdered and disappeared 30 years ago. Is it not time we found out what happened to his body?
We subsequently did ask Mr. McGuinness for a formal interview, which he declined, citing the lack of notice. In a statement, he repeated that he had no personal knowledge of the Robert Nairac case, but said Sinn Féin offered its full support to efforts to resolve the disappeared issue. What we have is the very first account from those involved in the killing of what happened to Robert Nairac's body, and it confirms what the SAS have until now only surmised from intelligence sources.
I understand that his body was fairly quickly moved by other people that night after the event and buried somewhere in an unmarked grave, and all the information I have is it's somewhere in a bog or in the water somewhere, but we honestly don't know.
I've spoken to Republicans in the area, and while some believe it's time to resolve the issue, others say it gives Republicans one up on the Brits. Julian Maylands, Robert Nairac's long-time friend, says the focus on finding the body misses the point.
All this idea that you need the body for closure is rubbish. The truth of it is he was murdered by the IRA, and what happens to the body is not, frankly, of any significance at all. It could be anywhere or everywhere. It's what he did in his life and his memory that counts, and he has a memorial in the Guards Chapel. So I don't think, I don't give a stuff if those who killed him, murdered him, who are still alive, know where the body is. Let it remain in their heads, because I don't care about that, and I'm perfectly sure he wouldn't have either.
Robert Nairac's bravery is not in doubt, but there remains a big question mark over his judgment in visiting the Three Steps pub alone that night.
If Robert had perhaps stuck to the rules, perhaps we wouldn't be sitting here now. On the other hand, if everyone stuck to the rules, you would never gain ground. What I don't think he fully realised, or maybe he did, was that he took far too many risks all at once, as opposed to measuring them out. And in the end, he was found out in the 3 Steps Inn.
Last week I travelled to England to meet the chief investigator with the Commission for the Disappeared, Jeff Knupfer. I showed him our interview with Terry McCormack from this programme.
Remember the girl asked Captain Nairac would he like to get up for a dance? He refused. He didn't get up to dance.
I think it would be fair to say that potentially the information provided is very, very significant indeed. And yes, it does give us some avenues to explore in the future.
Nairac was on the ground. I was basically keeping him there.
Does Terry McCormack his account seem credible to you?
I think, on face value, yes, it certainly seems credible. Indeed, it's a thought that this suggestion of the meat processing factory was a myth, nothing more than a myth, and was put about really to stop people looking for the grave. Clearly, the family, and we've spoken to the family, members of the family would very much like to have the remains of Captain Nairac recovered and formally buried in a place that they can presumably visit in the future and grieve.
Terry McCormack maintains that it is his wish too.
If me doing this interview can help in any way to recover the body of Captain Nairac, it would make me feel a lot better.
Is this one chapter in your life that will never be closed?
No. How can you shut the door there? I'm absolutely ashamed of what happened that night. I absolutely disgusted with myself.
Terry McCormack has not returned to Ireland since May 1977. What happened that night was as chaotic as it was brutal, but there remains a curious symmetry about it. The two champion boxers, born a couple of years apart, both never seen again, both disappeared. The war they were caught up in is over, with sworn enemies talking like old friends. Too late for Robert Nairac and many others, dead or alive.